Good evening.
Good evening.
Psalm 121. We got verses 1 through 8 up there. Really, most of the lessons, verses 1 and 2. But just read through it, and then we'll come back to the lesson itself. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and evermore. This is a beautiful psalm, and notice its positioning. Psalm 120 that we looked at last week speaks of the troubles of the present in a child of God's life, right? The distress that a child of God finds himself in because he lives in a land of lies. And having been obliged to dwell in a fallen world such as we do, God's children are strangers and aliens in what seems to be a foreign land or a foreign existence. It just doesn't seem right. We know that there's a better place for us. So Psalm 120, verses 6 and 7 says, "Too long have I had my dwelling among those who hate peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war." So Psalm 121 that we're going to look at tonight is a transitional passage. It flows from that distress of Psalm 120 to the rejoicing and gladness of Psalm 122 that begins with the words, "Glad was I when they said, let us go into the house of the Lord." So we're going to look at Psalm 121 tonight, and it's a beautiful psalm. Even if it was just out there by itself, it's so encouraging, so strengthening to help us in our faith, to encourage us in our daily living. Here's what the psalmist says: "I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come?" Now, the second part of this verse, "from where does my help come?" that's a rhetorical question. But going back to the first part then, it's a natural thing for people who are in distress to look up in anxious wonder for answers as to why these trials and tribulations have come their way, right? Something goes wrong. What do? What's the first thing? It's like, what's going on, Lord? Look up, what's going on? Now, if you lived in Israel back in the days of the Old Testament, really if you lived there today, but if you find yourself in that situation, something's going wrong, you say, what's going on? And you look up out of your distress, what are you going to see? You're going to see the mountains, right? Even if you're in the mountains, you look around, you're going to see mountains. If you're over on the plains, over by the Jordan River, you look up, you see mountains. If you're over in the Shephelah and then on down to the plains to the Mediterranean, you look up, you're going to see the mountains. So I lift my eyes to the hills. Why? Because, there's that distress, but I know there's safety. I know there's security from lots of things in the mountains, more so than are in the plains. If there was a problem and we were being attacked from a nation outside, one of the things we would probably want to do is flee to the mountains somewhere, because you can hide in the mountains, you can get around, and you get up on a higher place. You have some advantages if you're in a war. They want to capture the high ground. You want to be on the high ground. So in a lot of ways, in that distress, you want to be, we would say, in a higher place, a better place. It's like poetic literature, right? I want to be, what's that song? We're pressing on to higher ground, right? Why? Because we understand that as being better. So we have that natural thing there. As in distress, I want to look up. I want to be encouraged. I'm looking up for an answer. And the children of God, the children of Israel then would see the mountains. What were on the mountains? Well, sadly, they had allowed the high places there to the idols to exist in those mountains for so many years. And we talked about it, how they come into the promised land. They were supposed to drive the idol worshipers out, to tear down their high places, their sacred places, and they failed to do it. So here's this question. After they're there for 400 years, the period of the judges, what happens? Idolatry becomes entrenched in those areas again. So they look up to the mountains, they look up in their distress, and what do they see? Oh, hey, there's a place to worship Baal. Over here's a place to worship Ashtoreth. All these gods, got these places, to look up. And there's these high places for worship of the panoply of gods or idols. So the question's designed to stir the minds of the worshipers, because they're songs of ascents, what they're called, is as the worshipers coming to Jerusalem to worship, Mount Zion to worship. They're looking up to the mountains, and what are we coming to worship? And you can place this again in just about any time in Israel's history. What are we looking for? What are we searching for? What are we coming to worship? Where does my help come from? From these idol gods? What am I looking for? Where does my help come from? But then it's in that first verse. Where does my help come from? Why is this so important? That you'd almost lead off the song with it. Why do you want this to catch the eyes, the ears, the mind, the heart of the worshiper? Well, it's pretty necessary, isn't it? Psalm 121, verse 2, my help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Now that's a key. If you want to answer about, well, should I look to these idol gods, these places of worship for the idols who are either represent or are places dedicated to created things, why would I look to them for help when I could look a little bit higher and look to the one who created heaven and earth, and in actuality created either those things or created the things they are made out of? Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 8 through 10 begins some teaching about what the Lord wants us to understand regarding idols. Second giving of the Ten Commandments. You shall not make for yourselves a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Hey, do you see where they found an ocean under the earth? An entire ocean. They keep saying, we're running out of water, we're running out of water, and now scientists have found a whole ocean underneath there, which explains, why there could be enough water to have a flood that would cover the entire earth if it came up out from underneath the earth, like the Bible says. Anyway, back to where we're at. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. That's important for understanding the rest of this psalm, okay? But, see, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children for the third and fourth generations. Hey, when the fathers, the parents go into idolatry, that casts a long shadow over 3 or 4 generations sometimes. It takes a long time to recover. And you see that in the history of the children of Israel, just as we've been studying in the minor prophets. Sometimes they don't even recover. But the idols, the idols that the psalmist is saying, hey, you look up, where does my help come from? These idols? No. These idols are objects of the creation. Gold, silver, wood, whatever it is that they're made of. Even if it's, as we talked this morning about the spirits, the demons that are behind these idols, even those demons are created things. God created them. If they are the fallen angels who are in rebellion against God, why would anybody worship that which is created when you can worship the Creator? That becomes the question. Because they are created objects, they'll eventually perish, or at least be destroyed. Now, understand, those demons, are they going to be destroyed? Yes, they're going to be destroyed eternally, because being spiritual beings, lake of fire and brimstone, which is eternal punishment for them. Acts chapter 17, verse 29. Apostle Paul, when he's talking to the philosophers on Mars Hill, and we talked about this just slightly this morning in Bible class, but when he's talking to these philosophers, remember, most of these philosophers have come out of the idol religions, right? And they understand about what you might call demonology. They've studied all this stuff from their past. And where are they at? The Areopagus, can I even say it? Areopagus. That doesn't even sound right. They're on Mars Hill. They're on Mars Hill. You know who Mars was? He's the god of war. And when you have war, what is that? That's chaos and confusion, isn't it? That's what war is. Now, yeah, there's killing and destruction, but it's chaos and confusion. And that was their top god. Areopagus. There, I got it right one time. And that's why that hill is dedicated to him. Probably had a temple there and that's where they're talking. That's where Paul gets to give his argument about the unknown God. Of course, he's not the unknown God. He's just unknown to them, because they haven't considered that there could be a God who isn't an idol. There's a God who created everything, even these things that are worshipped, that are created beings, created things. Acts chapter 17, verse 29. Being then God's offspring, talking about us as human beings, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. And you know what? Those philosophers would have agreed with him. because they had turned away from the concept of a God made of gold and silver and stone or whatever. And they had a concept of something. They couldn't discover it. They couldn't put their hands on it. They couldn't completely describe it, but they had a name for it. You know what that name was? Logos. Logos. The one unifying thing that held everything together, the one purpose for everything. What John talks about in John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Logos. And the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Go over to the Colossian letter. All things were made by him, and for him, and through him, and in him all things consist. The philosophers knew there was something better, something greater, but they just didn't have a knowledge of it. And Paul was giving that to them. Colossians 3:5. Then we are told, put to death therefore what is earthly in you, sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. So yes, there are things we could build. I remember this morning I held up that pillow there, that cushion, and said, hey, this is an idol, worship it. But there are also other things. There are concepts that can become idols. But covetousness itself, the apostle says, that's idolatry. And this is not the only place in the New Testament where that's said. A sin becoming idolatry. A concept of the mind there. So these mountains that the psalmist is talking about were used for idolatrous worship. And to the ancients, they were a symbol of power. A mountain is, it's a tower, it's a place of safety, security, and power. Again, what do you want to do if you're in a battle? You want to get the high ground, right? So there you are. The highest mountain for them, even though it wasn't the highest peak, but it was the highest place for a stronghold, was Zion. Because there were some peaks around it, but it itself was a stronghold, and that's where the temple of God was located. Of course, David had brought the tabernacle there, and that's where they worshiped, and that's where, in that time period, they would come to worship God. The prophet Micah, we'll be studying Micah eventually in the minor prophets, but he speaks of the church as the mountain of the Lord's house being established on the tops of the mountains. Micah chapter 4 and verse 1. And you can't miss that he's talking about the church. And there are several other passages. Isaiah chapter 2, Daniel chapter 2, Micah chapter 4, that all point to the church. And so there's a lot of things in Psalm 121 that has messianic and church-related prophetic meaning to it. You combine those two terms then, mountains and gods, and we see the distorted image that the idolater makes. The idols were placed highest in the mountains, that were placed highest in the mountains. Well, they were considered the chief ones. The higher you get, the better they are, right? So the Baal, they'd be on top. That's why the Baal worship back at the time of Elijah. is way up in a mountain. It's way up further in the northern part of the promised land. But that's why he'd be up there. And Elijah went there to where they would worship, and he sets up an altar for Yahweh, and he defeats Baal and the prophets of Baal and Ashtoreth. You can go back and read that. Where's that battle take place? On a mountain, right? On top of a mountain. The idols placed highest in the mountains were considered the best gods and most powerful gods, but what does the psalmist here say? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. Hey, look up a little higher from the mountains, and that's where the God of heaven and earth is. Just a little bit higher, a lot greater. The God of heaven reigns supreme over all creation, including the creation of human mind and hands. So the question becomes for us, will we look to the mountain gods for our help? And we don't think of it in terms like they thought of it, do we? We don't go around, but I've talked before about going to Santa Fe, and if you go up and out past Ute Lake or the other lake that's out there, but you go out and up and through and out to, not toward Las Vegas, but I forget what that other town is out there, and then you hit 25 and go on down just around to Santa Fe. But there at the base of the mountain, even there's a shrine there. You stop and you can light a candle and you can pay some money, safe trips and all, But that's kind of the deal that we're talking about with these mountain gods. And even, you look back at the history of when Coronado came through, and he came through from Mexico, like Mexico City, where Mexico City is now, if I'm correct. If I'm wrong, I'm just trying to get it. But his people came through and up through the staked plains, the Llano Estacado. But what they would do, they would destroy the high places, and then with the priests came with them, they would build churches in those high places and tell the natives, you don't have to worship your way anymore. Here, we build these churches. Now you worship the way we say to worship. All right? It's all kind of the same type of, that was the same type of idolatry that you have here. So, but we don't look at it that way, in a sense. Most of the idolatry that we find in the United States, so to speak, or in Western culture today, is sort of the idolatry of the minds. The covetousness, right? Where covetousness, which is idolatry. Do you understand the point that I'm making? It's the idols of our minds that we worship more so than a piece of wood or a piece of silver or gold or what have you, though gold becomes that thing that a lot of people chase. So since the song was written, times have changed, right? People have changed. The mountain gods, so to speak, have changed. But there are a lot of things that haven't changed. Okay? Satan is still a liar, and he's the father of lies. So just because one lie is put to rest doesn't mean all lies have been put to rest. Follow me? There's still lies out there. So when the psalmist says in our last lesson in 120, you know, I'm living in a land of lies that distresses me, guess what? We'll always be living in a land of lies while we're here upon this earth, because Satan is the prince of the power of the air. He's kind of the one that's leading the rebellion against God here upon this earth. Money is still the root of all kinds of evil. That didn't stop anywhere in the past, right? That's what the scripture says. Money is the root of all kinds of evil. It still is. That hasn't changed. Politics is corrupted by extortion and blackmail. Was that true with Pharaoh? Yeah. Was that true with Ahab and Jezebel? Yes. Was that true with the Roman emperors? And is it true today? Yes, maybe even more so today. Okay? Alcohol and drugs are an escape from reality. Was that true back then? Sure. True now. Self leads to destruction of family, friends, and community. Oh. We see it all the way through, don't we? That hasn't changed. Satan, money, political power, alcohol, drugs, self, all these things can be defined as idols. Are they created objects? Yes. Are they perishable? Yes. Can they provide salvation? No. Are they worthy of our worship? Well, the answer is certainly not. Emphatically no. Do some people in ignorance bow down before these things? And regretfully, the answer is yes. That's what becomes their gods. And were we talking about witches and witchcraft here not too long ago? I forget who I was talking about. But that's one of those great examples of it. The people who want to control other people. Do you realize that in the New Testament, when you find a passage that talks about sorcery, okay, that the word relates to pharmacy, which means it's something about controlling other people with drugs. Like the black magic, we associate a lot with, say, New Orleans type, what do we call it? Black magic? Voodoo. The voodoo. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jeremy.
Sorry about that.
No, fine. I just forgot the word. But yeah, all those things people get involved in. So we see the question was placed here in this psalm. Will we look to the mountain gods for our help? That's to make us think also. All mankind for all time needs to think about that question. The psalmist was hurting. His soul was distressed by the fallen world around him. He's trying to find a way out of this distress. That was from Psalm 120. Probably a little bit of that connection comes in here. But when we consider all the options, we come away with only one logical escape that's available to us. Will I look to the mountain gods for my help? Emphatically, no. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. Made the things that these things, what represents them, is made out of. So why? Why would we look to those for help? And the rest of the song, it extols the virtues of the Lord. Look at that. Verses 3 through 8. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. Right? The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. And you got to say, oh, wait a minute. What about he let Israel be destroyed? He let Jerusalem eventually be destroyed, taken into exile. They come back, and later on, then Jerusalem is destroyed and the temple's destroyed again, never to be rebuilt. Well, this is conditional, isn't it? That if we don't look to the mountain gods for help, like Israel did, remember what we're studying? Minor prophets, Book of Amos, Book of Hosea so far. What did they look to for help? The mountain gods and these other nations. If they had just looked to the Lord for their help, all these things would have remained true. But because they didn't, how could the Lord be their helper when they did not acknowledge the Lord? Do you see the frustration that's there? Do you see the futility that's in worshiping these idols? So, how is he a keeper and preserver? Well, two things that the idols can never be. Well, it begins with, going to the next Psalm, 122 verse 1, I was glad when they said to me, or unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. Not to the house of the Baals, not to the house of Ashtoreth, not to those false idols, but to the house of the Lord, where the God of heaven and earth, we can worship him and he can become our keeper. When in times of distress, who do we look for help? Do we look to God who sits on the everlasting throne in heaven, or do we look to the mountain gods? Only the Father, through his Son Jesus Christ, can bring peace into our lives. And where there's peace, you know what? There's usually prosperity. And that's a good thing, I think. And that's why we pray for peace and prosperity for us, for our children, for those to come. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your attention. Have a need. Let your request be made known. So stand and sing.